WoW Classic Exploration Part 6, The Eastern Zones. Now, the secret to accessing all of the closed zones on the eastern edge of the map is one jump here off the eastern end of Loch Modan at the Farstrider Lodge. You can see it here in the clip. It can be a little tricky. I sped up the footage a little bit. But once you make this one sort of sideways jump onto that outcropped rock, you are home free for an enormous amount of exploration. But before we get too far into that, there's a disclaimer that I always give that is extremely important in this exploration in particular. Caution! Res sickness is a thing. If you die off in the middle of nowhere in some of these weird places, the game won't know what to do. It'll put your ghost in Dunmoreau or the Barrens, and you might not be able to get back, and you'll have to accept a spirit res and all the repair costs that go with that. Be careful and don't fall. Now, once you make it over that little jump, it's just a matter of navigating your way up these rocks and paths, in the little spots around and behind these trees. The tree leaves can get in the way of seeing some of it. Just try to keep an eye on where I'm going in the clip and watch the mini-map to get a really more accurate idea of exactly where we are. Once you get over this little chunk onto the mountains on the edge of the world here, you have a choice of falling to your death or going north or south. Now, what I'm going to do in the footage is I'm going to explore north first, and then we're going to clip back and go south. There are some invisible walls on the far northern end of the unexplored areas and on the far southern end that were likely intended to stop players from being able to get into these unfinished places. But in a nice bit of irony, we're going to be finding those invisible walls from the wrong side. So here, you see we're up at the top. This is the spot I was talking about where you can sort of make a choice of going north or south. And this one little spot is the key to exploring all of this. I really want to take a minute and reinforce the disclaimer. Do not fall and die here. I first explored this area back, a decade ago when the Burning Crusade was current content. And I was playing on a Horde character, and I died in one of these spots. And it teleported my ghost back to the Barrens. A spirit res at level 70 was not a cheap prospect when I had 2 or 2.5 sets of gear in my bags, for DPS and healing. And when I died and my ghost spawned in the Barrens, I just sat there and stared at my screen for a few seconds, processing what had just happened. And I did some research, and it turns out that in the game's code, when you die, if you're in a place where the game can't really figure out what to do that doesn't have, a defined resurrection point for the local spirit healer, it sends you back to the Barrens or Dunmoreau as a default option. That's, sort of error catching code that Blizzard built in. If you die in a weird place and they can't figure out anywhere else to put you, it's got to put you somewhere. So it puts you in the Barrens or Dunmoreau based on your faction. So don't die here. It sucks. There's a very strong chance you won't be able to get back to your corpse and all that. Another kind of important point, some of the drops here, you can't get back up, just because of the nature of all this unfinished terrain. So once you drop into some of these areas, it's basically a one-way trip. As you can see in the footage here, these areas are largely undeveloped. There's a lot of, flat, featureless terrain. Down on the southern end, it gets a little bit more interesting. The terrain is a little bit more chaotic. There's some like jagged areas in that unnamed zone east of the Burning Steppes that make me think that Blizzard intended to actually do something there at some point. But where we are here, this eventually became, I think, the Twilight Highlands in Cataclysm. But here, it's just kind of nothing. And this is another example. So you thought we had already dropped down from high. There's still a lot farther to go, down into these areas. Now what we've got here is just a short example I spliced in showing some of the invisible walls. Um, if you get into the northeastern part of like the wetlands, where you see, I think it was Grim Batal is the name of that area. It eventually became a dungeon, that dwarven hold. There are some invisible walls here that you can't get past, so you can just like start running, against the edge of that cliff face there, and you can't go any further. And you can see here I'm kind of demonstrating there's invisible wall like right there. We sort of came at this from the other end. You can go around the invisible wall. I don't really know entirely why it doesn't extend all the way around these areas. But, there it is. So here I clipped and brought us back to heading south from that initial spot up on the mountains. Now, if you start heading south here, again, you're going to see some serious drops, and you want to be careful. You're going to be able to get down into the eastern edge of the Red Ridge Mountains. I think eventually was Searing Gorge down there, if you go far enough, and that unnamed zone to the east of the Searing Gorge. In order to get there, you have to sort of go along the top of these mountains for a little while. Then you get to a spot where you can't really go any further. It's up ahead there. You can't really go any further without risking falling down the slope unexpectedly. And, it can be tough while you're mounted to have, like, a dismount macro with a pally bubble on your hotbar. I recommend sort of doing what I do here and just kind of jumping down. There you can see a nice view off into the Badlands. So we're just going to keep going south and jump down off to the left eventually. I'm going to be speeding up the rest of the footage here just so this isn't like an hour-long video. But you can get a look at all the unfinished terrain down there in that unnamed, unfinished zone. You're going to notice that the game thinks we're in the Forbidding Sea, even though we're clearly up on the side of some unfinished garbage mountain. And so check out the rest of the exploration footage, and thank you for watching.